She made history as the first American woman to climb Everest without oxygen, but hours after reaching the top, she disappeared into the mountain's deadly zone. Her story stayed frozen for 9 years until one British climber came back and did what nobody else would dare. What he discovered and did next changed everything. Frances Arsentev had so much to live for. At 40, she was a skilled mountain climber with a bright smile and big dreams. Her son Paul meant everything to her, and her husband Sergei, a legendary Russian climber known as the Snow Leopard, shared her passion for dangerous peaks. But Frances had one goal that took over her thoughts. She wanted to be the first American woman to reach the top of Mount Everest without extra oxygen. This was something that had killed experienced climbers before, a challenge that pushed people's bodies past their breaking point. When she was getting ready for her trip that spring, Frances wrote a quick note to Paul and included a map showing her path to the mountains. "Hi, Paul. We're at base camp. Miss you and love you, Mom." She had no idea that 9 years later, a British climber would make a choice that would completely change her story. May 17, 1998. Mount Everest Base Camp was busy with the usual excitement before people tried to reach the summit, but Frances and Sergei Arsentev were different from the other climbing teams. Unlike the well-supported groups with their helpers, extra oxygen, and radio contact, this couple climbed by themselves. This wasn't being careless. It was a smart risk taken by two experienced high mountain climbers. Sergei was known as the Snow Leopard for his incredible climbing achievements, but even famous climbers can underestimate Everest. Their attempts on May 20th and 21st both failed. First when their headlights died, then after climbing only 50 meters. By May 22nd, they had already spent 3 deadly nights above 8,000 meters where bodies start dying. Any smart climber would have gone down, but Frances wasn't thinking clearly about this goal. She was completely focused on it. At 1 o'clock in the morning on May 22nd, in cold that could freeze skin in minutes, they started their final attempt to reach the top, moving slower than ever. Without extra oxygen, they climbed through the dark toward what would happen to them. They didn't know that this choice would split them up forever. One would become famous forever. The other would disappear completely, and both would become part of Everest's most scary mystery. Hours went by. The sun came up over the mountains, showing 2 tiny people still climbing when they should have been going down. They were making a deadly mistake that would create both a legend and a tragedy that would take 9 years to solve. Late in the afternoon of May 22, 1998, Frances Arsentev stood on top of Mount Everest. She had done it. She was the first American woman to reach the world's highest point without extra oxygen. But instead of feeling victorious, she only felt completely tired. Her body was shutting down. Her movements were slow and stiff. Next to her, Sergei was just as exhausted. They had reached the top dangerously late in the day, a mistake that kills more climbers than anything else on Everest. The main rule of Everest is simple. Reaching the top is only half the job. Getting down alive is what makes the difference between success and tragedy. As they started going down in the fading light, neither could have imagined they were beginning the most heartbreaking separation in mountain climbing history. Somewhere in the darkness, confused from being tired and lacking oxygen, they lost each other. By morning, Sergei had made it back to camp, but Frances was nowhere to be seen. The truth hit him like a landslide. His wife, the woman he'd climbed the world's highest mountains with, the mother of young Paul waiting at home, was somewhere above him on the mountain, alone and in danger. Without thinking twice, Sergei grabbed an oxygen tank and medicine and went back up into the death zone. He was going to save her or die trying. Nobody who knew Sergei was surprised by this choice. It was exactly what the Snow Leopard would do. But as he climbed higher, looking desperately for any sign of Frances, he had no way of knowing that other climbers had already found her, and what they found would stay with them for the rest of their lives. A Uzbek climbing team trying to reach the summit themselves had come across Frances near the top. She was barely awake, suffering badly from not having enough oxygen and frostbite. Her condition was very serious, but she was alive. The Uzbek climbers did everything they could. They gave her oxygen, tried to help her move, but they were climbing without local helpers and had limited supplies. Finally, exhausted and running out of their own oxygen, they had to leave her with an empty oxygen bottle and go down to save themselves. But they made one important decision that would help save lives. They attached her safety harness to a fixed rope to stop her from sliding down the mountain face. That evening, as the Uzbek team went down, they met Sergei climbing up through the darkness, still looking for his wife. They told him where to find her. It was the last time anyone would see the snow leopard alive. What happened next would stay a mystery for a whole year, but when the truth finally came out, it would show the real depth of love and sacrifice in one of climbing's greatest tragedies. May 24th, 1998. British climber Ian Woodall and South African climber Cathy O'Dowd were 300 meters from the Everest summit when O'Dowd saw something that would change both their lives forever. A flash of purple cloth, a jerky movement in the shadows of the first step. "That body's alive," O'Dowd told her partner. "I'm going to take a look." What she found would give her nightmares for years. Lying in a twisted position, attached to a fixed rope, was a woman with skin as white and smooth as china, a sign of severe frostbite that made her look like a sleeping doll. Her long dark hair surrounded a face that was beautiful despite what the mountain had done to her. Then the woman opened her eyes. "Don't leave me," she whispered, her pupils huge black holes in the thin air. "Don't leave me here to die." O'Dowd felt sick. The woman looked like her, same age, similar looks. For a scary moment she felt like she was looking at what could happen to her. "I am an American," the woman said suddenly. "I am an American." That's when they knew who she was. Frances Arsentiev, the cheerful woman who had sat in their base camp tent just days before, talking about her son Paul back home, sharing tea and family stories. Ian Woodall came with his Sherpa team. They found Sergei's ice axe and rope lying nearby, but no sign of the Russian climber. The empty oxygen bottle the Uzbek team had left was next to Frances, and her thick gloves were scattered around. Signs of hypothermia had made her feel dangerously hot, causing her to take off protective clothing. For over an hour, they tried everything. They tried to pull her into a sitting position, but she was completely limp, unable to hold up her own weight. They tried to get her arms into her jacket sleeves, but she couldn't control her movements. When they tried to make her stand, her legs collapsed like wet noodles. "If you can help us, we can try to move you down the mountain," Woodall told her, looking straight into her face, searching for any sign that she understood. "If you don't, you're going to die." There was nothing. She was awake but not mentally there. The mountain had taken her mind even before it took her life. The temperature was -30 degrees Celsius. Standing still for over an hour, the rescue team was starting to get frostbite themselves. They faced an impossible choice: try a rescue that would probably kill them all, or leave a conscious woman to die alone on the mountain. "Why are you doing this to me?" Frances asked, her voice barely heard. Those words hurt more than any wind. She didn't understand that they were trying to help. In her oxygen-starved confusion, she thought they were hurting her on purpose. The decision came without discussion. Even the Uzbek climbers who had tried to help her the day before had reached the same conclusion. She was too far gone to save. As they got ready to leave, Frances had stopped talking and seemed to fall unconscious. O'Dowd lost all desire to reach the summit. "I climb because I enjoy it," she would later say. "After finding Frances, there was no way reaching the top could have made me happy." They left her there, still attached to the guide rope, still breathing. It was the last time she would be seen alive. But the mystery of what happened to Sergei was just starting, and Frances' story itself was far from over. Frances Arsentiev died alone on May 24, 1998, still attached to that guide rope high on Mount Everest. The woman who had reached her biggest dream, becoming the first American woman to climb Everest without oxygen, had paid the biggest price. But what happened to Sergei stayed a haunting mystery. The last time anyone saw him for sure was when the Uzbek climbers met him climbing up through the darkness on May 23rd, carrying oxygen and medicine to save his wife. After that, the snow leopard simply disappeared into the thin air of the death zone. Had he reached Frances? His ice axe and rope found next to her suggested he had, but where was his body? How had he died? The questions tortured everyone who knew their story. Back home in Colorado, 10-year-old Paul DiStefano waited for news that would never come. His mother's last letter, with its happy message and hand-drawn map, became a heartbreaking reminder of dreams that turned into nightmares. But on Everest, Frances' story was just starting its most disturbing part. Her body lay where everyone could see it on the main climbing path. In her purple jacket, she became a creepy landmark climbers called Sleeping Beauty. Season after season, hundreds passed her body. Some paid respects, others hurried by, disturbed. A few took pictures that spread online, turning her death into a horrible tourist attraction. "Turn right at the guy with the green boots," climbers would say. "Turn left at the woman in the purple jacket." There was no dignity in it. The cost of bringing a body down from that height was estimated between $40,000 and $100,000. The technical challenges were huge, the moral questions even bigger. Who was responsible? Who had the right? For 9 years, Frances Arsentiev stayed where she died, a frozen monument to both human ambition and human tragedy. Thousands of people saw her. Hundreds passed within feet of her body. But nobody did anything about it until 2007, when one man decided enough was enough. The same British climber who had given up his own summit attempt to stay with her in her final hours couldn't forget those desperate words. "Don't leave me here to die." Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. He had left her to die because he had no choice, but now, 9 years later, Ian Woodall was coming back to keep a promise he'd carried in his heart for almost 10 years. What he was planning would be unprecedented, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. The expedition Woodall organized was called the Tau of Everest, and its mission was unlike anything else in mountain climbing history. Woodall planned to return to give Frances Arsentiev the burial she deserved. Moving a frozen body at 8,500 meters would require incredible strength, perfect weather, and tremendous courage. One mistake could create more deaths. In 1999, Jake Norton had discovered Sergei's body, apparently killed in a fall while trying to rescue his wife. The evidence showed Sergei had reached Frances and tried to save her, leaving his ice axe and rope beside her. But the effort cost him his life. It was a love story that ended in double tragedy. The snow leopard had died as he lived, trying the impossible to save someone he loved. Now, Woodall wanted to honor both their memories. As his team set up base camp in 2007, Woodall explained why he was doing this. In the back of my mind, I hoped someone would eventually do something for her. But the only reason anyone would be up that high is if they're on their way to the summit or on the way down. In either case, you can't really spend the hours needed to bury a body. It needed a special mission. This was that mission. Finding the exact location would take days. The work of moving her body would be exhausting at a height where every breath is a struggle, and the weather window for such an operation was narrow. One storm could trap the team in the death zone with no hope of rescue. But Woodall had made a promise 9 years earlier. As he'd walked away from Frances Arseniev, leaving her to die alone on the mountain, he'd promised that someday, somehow, he would return to give her dignity in death. That day had finally come. May 23, 2007, exactly 9 years after Frances Arseniev spoke her last words to another person, Ian Woodall stood next to her body once again. She looked exactly as she had in 1998. The extreme cold and thin air had kept her perfectly preserved, like a time capsule of that terrible day. Her purple jacket was still bright against the gray rock. Her dark hair still framed her face. She still looked like she was sleeping. But now, finally, someone had come to wake her from her long sleep. Woodall and his team had carried an American flag up the mountain. In a short but moving ceremony at 8,500 meters above sea level, they put it over Frances' body and said a prayer. For the first time in 9 years, she was treated not as a landmark or a warning story, but as a human being who deserved respect. Then came the hard work. Moving a frozen body at that height pushed human endurance to its limits. Every action required enormous effort in the thin air. The team worked carefully, methodically, respectfully. They weren't just moving a dead body, they were fulfilling a sacred duty. Slowly, respectfully, they moved Frances to a lower spot on the mountain face, placing her where she would no longer be visible to passing climbers. They built a simple pile of rocks, the only burial possible at that height. For the first time since 1998, climbers attempting Everest's North Route would not have to pass the Sleeping Beauty. She had finally been laid to rest with dignity. Woodall later thought about the mission. This will be my last expedition, so I thought it would be right to give something back. But the expedition did more than just move a body. It honored the memory of both Frances and Sergei Arseniev, a couple whose love story had become one of mountain climbing's greatest tragedies and greatest examples of sacrifice. The woman who dreamed of being the first American to climb Everest without oxygen had reached her goal, even if it cost her everything. The husband who could have saved himself had chosen to die trying to rescue the woman he loved. And a British climber who had carried guilt and sadness for 9 years had finally found a way to turn tragedy into something meaningful. Today, Paul Di Stefano, the 10-year-old boy who said goodbye to his mother in 1998, is a grown man. He carries with him not just the memory of her last letter, but the knowledge that strangers cared enough about his mother to risk their lives making sure she was treated with dignity. Frances Arsentiev's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest victories come at the highest cost, that love can drive people to try the impossible, and that even in death, even on the world's most unforgiving mountain, human compassion can win over not caring. She disappeared from Mount Everest in 1998. 9 years later, a British climber did something that proved the best of humanity survives even in the worst situations. He kept a promise that honor demanded, but few would have kept. In doing so, he gave the Sleeping Beauty something more precious than any summit. He gave her peace. Did you enjoy this story? If saving someone would probably kill you too, would you try anyway? Let us know in the comments below. If you like the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Sometimes the best you can do is come back later and do what's right. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.